Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are taking a look at the Roach as a unit. Now, it's worth noting that we're going to be doing another video talking specifically about the Corpser Roach. A lot of what we mention here will be true about the Vile Roach as well, so we may not even end up doing a video specific to Vile Roaches, just because they mostly play the same. There is a little bit more in the utility category. They also use slightly more resources, so we might end up doing something there. We might not. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm gonna push it off a little bit just because I don't think it's strictly as necessary to do a video on them compared to the Corpser Roach, because the Corpser Roach plays very, very differently from the standard Roach. Okay, but just in general, it's worth noting the Roach is something of an anomaly among Zerg units. Generally speaking, Zerg units tend to be a lot stronger in evade saves, or at least on par with evade saves as they are with armor saves. The Roach is one of the few up there with like the hydralisk that can honestly say, yeah, we've got a really decent armor save, right? Like this thing can actually just take a beating, and if you're not surging hits past it, you are not going to do very much against these things. And even if you are surging and trying to do surge wounds, the fact that these Roaches can get evade saves relatively easily, and that these synergize really well with how Roaches are designed, means that actually removing these can be extremely difficult. And that is a very rare song to be sung by Zerg units. Zerg units tend to rely on mass numbers or mass wounds on a model in order to keep them on the table. And the Roaches, well, they're just a very different animal. And so toward that end, as we look at their resource management, offensive, defensive, and utility capabilities, and their ability to hold and take objectives, you're going to find this is going to play very differently from a style perspective to other stuff. And so, as we were talking about in the Roach Rush video earlier this week, it's a very unique build, right? You can really lean into it, or you can just smatter a couple of these in because maybe you need to really hold down a certain section of the battlefield. You want a hard counter against somebody else's light units. This is your option, and it helps to buy time for all the rest of your units to kind of work around. It's a very solid anvil, so the rest of your army can be the hammer that beats down the enemy and cracks them open. And so to start off with, from a resource management perspective, it's exceptional. Because depending on how you build this unit, oh, and I realized we have the wrong image there. Please forget about that. That is completely not necessary here. From a resource management perspective, you're going to use like nothing. This is the beauty of it. You only pay resources for one thing, and that's Glial Reconstitution, where in the movement phase, if you want to, you can tap Glial Reconstitution, and you can improve your speed characteristic from 4 to 5, which is nice. And if you're on creep, it goes up by an additional 1, which means you'll at least be speed 6 with a 3-inch regroup, so moving 9 inches in a single movement phase. Could be speed 7 with a 3-inch regroup if you're using accelerating creep in addition to this. And so now that's a 10-inch move in a single turn, which is really, really good for units in the game that are not considered to be like super fast, right? These are not Raptor Zerglings or anything like that. That is really, really good movement, okay? In the assault phase, you're not using any because even though you have the ability to do impact hits, you don't have a charge ability that requires you to spend energy in order to be able to, utilize certain benefits. And so you're not spending anything, which is great. Now, you're still going to probably be tapping tactical cards, okay? And this is the big thing, is that resource management, we're looking specifically at things like psionic energy usage, command point usage, and for Zerg, biomass usage. What we're not looking at is how often you are likely to tap a tactical card, right? We're trying to figure out how often is a unit going to make it so you have to spend things for their resource count, which is then taking away from the card abilities that you took. The nice thing about Roaches is you're getting to use your cards for their actual abilities as opposed to really having to use them for their biomass cost. Now, there's one exception to this, and that is the Vile Roach. Vile Roach has the ability, in any phase, technically speaking, to be able to shoot bile, right, at people to kind of slow them down. And so their hit chance dips by 1, right? And that is advantageous because, if you're facing stalkers and they're shooting at you on a 3+, just trust me on this, 3+ compared to 4+ is actually pretty substantial. Okay, and stalkers are the kind of things that are going to hurt you quite a bit, and you're going to really struggle to hurt them. Ditto for marauders, right? If marauders are hitting you, they're doing really good damage against you. You're not really doing very good damage against them. And so anything you can do to make it so that things that would have been hits become misses is going to be advantageous, but it's really the only time you'd probably be spending anything in the assault phase, is if you're running Vile Roaches, okay? And then the combat phase, nothing again really to spend here. This is also a phase you really don't want to be using with Roaches, all things considered. If you can possibly avoid it, you are not going to be doing a lot of damage, which is something we're going to be seeing next, okay? But the result is, and this is one of the reasons to consider putting 1 or 2 Roach units, maybe more, into a list, is that they don't eat up your resources, right? If you built your cards around, okay, I want to have lots of spawning pools for my zerglings. I want to have, detection in case they're running hidden units. I want to have, the ability to burrow my units and then unburrow, with hatcheries, and then unburrow my units with nasty surprise from the Roach Warren, like we talked about earlier this week. You can actually use those cards for those abilities, right? You're not actually tapping them for biomass, which is really, really nice. Now, when we look at offense, honestly, this is actually probably the weakest side to the Roach, to be honest, is their offensive abilities. Not because they're bad at shooting. They're pretty bad at close combat, right? And, we'll talk about that in about 43 seconds. But they're pretty like one-dimensional, right? You see it there with a Hydrotic Bile upgrade over there at the bottom of the picture, where you can gain the Surge type light with D3+1, and this is only a 10-point upgrade. That's a really good upgrade. Against light units, they're really good at doing damage. They're going to cook you if they're shooting at you, especially Vile Roaches, which are getting 4 shots per model. Standard Roach is only 3, right? However, if you're shooting armored units, you can have a reasonable number of shots, right? And you can see it there with the acid saliva, right, over there on the left-hand side. Like, yeah, you're going to get a decent number of shots, but how much are you actually going to sneak past damage, right? And so when we look at the movement phase for how to do offense, you want to maneuver to roughly about 8 inches away, okay? And there's a lot of different ways to do this. So burrow ambush, really reliable way of doing this, where you can place 18 in order to get onto the board. You can move up just really aggressively, especially if you get the first drop on the first turn. You just push right up there toward the middle, contesting an objective, whatever it is that you need to do. And now the opponent kind of has to meet you, but they also have to get in range of the objective, which means they're going to be in range of your shooting attack, right? Which is really, really nice. You can also use this by just moving on creep, right? Again, if you're taking Glower Constitution, you can do that as well. So you have some options. But the biggest thing being, if possible in the movement phase, you really do want to burrow these guys. I would not recommend using the any phase burrow ability. It costs 2 biomass, which is a lot. Instead, tap 1 card, right? This is a great place for hatchery. Or if you have burrow ambush, my understanding of how this works is that because you perform the place 18 and then the activation ends, you don't actually have a chance afterwards to burrow them as part of that. So you're going to probably need to take the Zerg Swarm in order to get that across, right? Because then you activate a second unit later in the round, and you target that first Roach unit that push forward, and you then burrow that unit because that unit, since we're still in the movement phase, has not been engaged yet. And so that way you can still burrow it, but one of the biggest things that you can do is burrow the unit in order to make sure that they're a little more defensible and resilient. It also does force soldiers who want to shoot at you to probably move closer, unless they decided to spend an orbital command or an overseer or an observer in order to try to find you. And then the assault phase, it's all about surprise, right? In an ideal world, this is your MO. You activate the unit. They're already burrowed, so you start with regeneration. You heal 2. Extremely effective if you've already been shot at. So save these guys off for later in the round. Then you tap the Roach Warren for nasty surprise. You pop back up. You still have your action left, which means now you can shoot. And your shooting is going to be your acid saliva. For the standard Roach, this is going to be 3 shots per model. For the Vile Roach, this is going to be 4 shots per model. So you're going to have about 3 to 9 attacks on a 3+, right? Depending on whether you have 1 to 3 models. Surging against light targets, D3+1, because you should always buy Hydrotic Bile, literally every single time. Unless you have very good reason to believe you're going to be fighting against a Roach Rush, a heavy Marauder build, a heavy Stalker build, where investing in this is wasted points. Then again, how many points are you actually wasting, and can you actually add an extra model, an extra unit for that? That is an excellent question, and I'm not entirely sure what the answer is. And then, if you do take Kerrigan Swarm, you can Precision 1 off of this relatively easily. Alternatively, you'd have to use a Hydralisk then, which is a relatively expensive way to get Precision 1. Okay, but this also goes back to one of the things that makes Zerg pretty fair. Zerg don't get a lot of keywords. And when they do get keywords, it's extremely limited and pretty expensive. So just keep that in mind, right? A lot of other places, precision relatively easy to get. Zerg only really easily get precision in close combat, which is not particularly helpful for the Roach. But once you shoot with these, like, it's a pretty decent attack, right? And you'll see the math here in a little bit. But you also have the option, if you want to charge, right? Again, you have a reasonable speed that you can move at, and you do get devastating charge. So when you do charge, you do get to do 2 impact hits per model, hitting on a 4+. It's not necessarily the greatest, but it can be okay. And if you do decide to tap an evolution chamber, you can make this hit on a 3+, which is slightly more reliable. Again, do you want to use it for that? I'm not entirely sure. I feel like there's a lot of other units that might benefit a little bit more from getting that bonus, but you can technically do it. Now, it's also worth noting that if you want to make sure that your charge is a little bit more reliable, you can also tap an Overseer after you've already rolled, which is beautiful. This is better than the charge ability and the metabolic boost ability in my mind, is doing it this way. You can then look at the dice, see if you would fail, and then tap the Overseer to roll another dice and take the higher one, which is really, really nice. So just know that while they're technically not built well for close combat, more on this later in the Corpse or Roach video, if you are going to charge into something, at least, assuming that you took an Overseer, you can make that charge relatively reliable, which is great. Or at the very least, about as good as you can do in this game. And then finally, in the combat phase, if you possibly can, just avoid it. Right? I mean, again, you're getting 2 to 6 attacks on a 4+. It's not great odds, okay? But if push comes to shove and you really, really, really need to shove, technically speaking, you can get into close combat, and you do have a better attack than, say, a Queen or, Terran medics, any sort of support style units. You are better than that. About on par with Marauders, so it feels pretty fair. But in general, you don't want to be relying on this for damage. Maybe if you need to remove, like, 1 or 2 wounds off of a couple models, that's about it. That's really all you need. So it's a relatively short range model, but it's a durable model, right? Only an 8-inch range is not very far in this game, but it is at least pretty durable. The biggest issue is that it's really going to struggle if you end up facing armored targets where you are not actually surging against them, and thus being able to actually do reliable damage can be tricky, or just close combat units who really want to get into you with close combat and you don't remove a lot of them with shooting before they can get in. Because if that situation happens, you might find that it's going to be a really hard grind for you. And so, as we take a look at the actual stats on it, we discover it has reasonable damage potential. Okay? It's listed as average. It's the higher end of average. Could be good. This is also partially what encourages me maybe to do a separate video for the Vile Roach, because I feel like the Vile Roach might just barely break the cusp on this one. So we'll see. But future video for that one if we end up doing one separate. I just feel a little bit bad because it's mostly the same as this one. But it is a separate unit, so maybe we should just do a separate video, because you know what? Some people really want to give the time of day to their special unit, and Vile Roach is one of my personal favorites. So more on that later. If you have thoughts, please leave them down in the comments below. If you'd really like to see them, let me know, and it doesn't take much to twist my arm to make that video. But when we look at the acid saliva, assuming you've taken the hydriotic bile, I'm not going to assume you're spending a hydralisk den or a Kerrigan swarm or anything else like that on here, because you may not have room for those, okay? Or you might have chosen to go Zerg swarm like I commonly do. And so we'll just assume you're working without precision 1 on this. With a rate of attack of 3 to 9 attacks on a 3+ to hit, you're looking at about 2 to 6 hits that you can plan on. You're then going to surge about 3 of them past light armor, right? And so, assuming that you're doing 1 damage per hit, you're going to be doing about 2 to 5 wounds against light targets and about 1 to 3 wounds against armored targets, more or less, okay? The result is, like, it's fine, right? If you did have to charge in a given turn, then you might end up doing something closer to, like, 1 to 3 hits on impact hits, which is not much, but you do get a little bit in there. There's no surge. So you're looking at like 1 to 2 wounds against light targets, maybe a wound against armored targets. Okay? So, setting reasonable expectations here. You're going to clip a couple zerglings, right? You're going to clip 1 marine. Now, admittedly, they might have stim pack wounds, so it might turn out to be more than one Marine, okay? But plan on one Marine, okay? Maybe not even that. So realistically, just again, I want to set realistic expectations here. You're not doing a lot off of that charge. And then with your claws, assuming that you have a spawning pool, which most lists are going to have a spawning pool in there somewhere for no other reason, then you're like, okay, well, I got 25 gas left. Maybe I've already taken an overseer. I guess I'm going to take a spawning pool because it's the other thing for 25, right? It's really not that much else otherwise. And if that's the case, you got 2 to 6 attacks, 4+. That's going to be, assuming precision 2, about 3 to 5 hits. Obviously, it could be as low as 2 just because you might only have one model left. But again, it's not actually going to change the math all that much in terms of where it ends. You're not surging for anything because you don't get any surge here. And the result is, on 1 damage, 2 to 4 against light, maybe 1 to 3 against armor. Okay, it's really not going to be that much in terms of damage. So if you do end up getting charged by things, you are not going to hit very hard against them, right? And expect the lower end of numbers if you have the lower number of models, which means if you're not striking first, you probably are really not going to do very much. And so as long as you have 2 to 3 models, like they're going to be doing just fine, okay? But especially if they get you down to just 1 model left, just know you are not going to be doing hardly any damage at all with roaches. Okay, it's still going to be durable, not going to be worth any supply, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But at least, like, have a realistic expectation. It's not going to remove very much for you. Like, unless you're going after 2 Marines, a couple medics, right? You know, something like that. You're really not going to get a lot of damage against them. And so when looking at defensive abilities on the opposite side of things, they're exceptional. They're absolutely exceptional, right? I mean, with an armor save of 3+, that is the best in the game that you can currently get. I don't think we're going to see anything better than that. I suspect that for things like hydralisks, immortals, stuff like that, they're still going to have a 3+ armor. They're just going to have a lot of hit points, right? And that's going to help to make up for the fact that, well, they're supposed to be more tanky, more beefy. I think that's probably the better way of handling it. A 2+ armor gets a little bit crazy. So I don't think we need to have that. With an evade save of 5+, the nice thing about Zerg evade saves is that because you have access to burrow, you can actually do this a lot, right? Like you're actually pretty likely to get the benefit of burrow, which means you're pretty likely to get the benefit of the evade save. And a 5+ is a perfectly excellent evade save. It's one of the best evades you can typically get. And with Zerg Swarm, you can actually get this down to a 4+. And as we mentioned in the past, if you're starting with a 3+ armor, and then even stuff they surge past, you're blocking half of those, that is really, really good odds. Like, really good odds, okay? Phenomenally good. And with 12 wounds, past all of this defense, like, you can sustain a lot of damage. Okay, you can take a lot of attacks against you to the levels we have not seen yet for other units that we've reviewed. At size 2, you still have a reasonable chance of getting cover, which is really nice. So you can block additional potential wounds because, hey, you can only see one roach. So even though you hit me with so many hits and so many wounds, things surging, and I botch my roll, you get one guy, right? And that is really nice for roaches. Obviously, it's not quite as nice as it is for, say, like zerglings or marines because you have only 3 models in a roach unit. It is a really nice way to make sure that that large unit of marauders with all of those attacks doing a good surge, doing damage to each, they're going to get, it doesn't matter if they get 2 hits through or 10 hits through, they get one guy, right? It's not going to make a difference beyond that, which is really good. And then from a special rules perspective, regeneration is really, really nice because it means that even if they shoot at you and slip wounds past your armor save and past your evade save, you're going to heal 2 of it, right? Which is really, really nice, right? It's a better chance that if they threw stuff and they were just barely getting past and they slip a couple wounds through, you might have undone all their work or most of their work for the round for the one unit that they have that could realistically target you. That is really, really good news from a defense perspective because it's just going to keep you in the fight a whole lot longer, okay? Then you got your special rules like Tunneling Claws. The nice thing about Tunneling Claws is that typically when you declare a move action, you lose the burrowed status. Which means if you're already burrowed from last turn, because you just needed to, you know, hang out and get to another place, or you burrowed at the beginning of your turn, right, in order to make sure that you can maneuver underneath of people in the case of burrowed, or, you know, you wanted to make sure that you would be properly hidden and get the hidden status, Tunneling Claws allows you to be able to continue moving without having to worry about losing that status, which is really, really, really nice. And so, in my opinion, this is a really, really great way to make sure that you're both getting mobility while also doing resilience at the same time. And that is relatively rare in this game. I'm not anticipating us seeing a lot of that in the game for a while. And so I mean, this is an extremely durable unit, right? This is punchy, it's dangerous, and it can take a beating, right? Dangerous against light units, obviously, but like the amount of danger you can present to Marines, to medics, to adepts, especially, is quite substantial, and they are going to really struggle to do anything back to you. And you can see this down here in the survivability chart, right? Surge Light, depending on how many attacks they did, and I only assumed 2 uses of regeneration on this. It could be worse than that. They might need to throw 36 attacks to try to remove a single roach unit. That is multiple Marine squads over the course of multiple turns trying to remove these guys, especially if the roaches have a chance to shoot at one of those Marine squads to try to winnow them down. This is really, really good for typically 200 points or less. That is phenomenally good value, right? And against armored people who surge against armored targets, obviously it's going to be less because you're not going to get as many armor saves, which is where the real meat is. And this, by the way, only assumes a 5+ evade save. This does not assume a 4+ evade save. It's still taking them 24 shots, right? 24 shots. That is multiple turns from a small Marauder squad. That is multiple turns from any size Stalker squad, and it is at least 2 turns from a large Marauder squad. That is phenomenal value that you're getting because they were paying double your cost easily in order to try to remove you. That is phenomenally good. And again, absorbing a bunch of attacks that now don't go after Zerglings going to rush into any of those choices we just mentioned and do really, really good numbers on them, especially if you decided to pay the extremely low cost of Shredding Claws. Okay? So, all things considered, defensively, I think you'd be really hard-pressed to find a better unit in this game. They do exist. We talked about the Praetor Guard. But you would be really hard-pressed to find them, and especially hard-pressed to find them, I suspect, on the Zerg side of the house. Now, in looking at utility, they're also really good. First of all, at a speed 4 that can be as high as speed 7, they've got really, really good mobility, right? They have a supply 2. They have a supply. Oh, wait a minute. The heck is that? That's why. There are some scenarios where you can actually get them up to supply 2. Okay? Divide and Conquer, for example, if they're within range of a mission marker, you can get them higher. So that's kind of worth looking at. And might be worth including, especially if you're pretending to do a Roach Rush. In my opinion, Divide and Conquer is almost an absolute auto-include. Because now our supply 1 unit can be treated as supply 2, and it takes them forever to drop below supply 2 because they got to get rid of 2 out of the 3 models, right? Even then, though, and this is the big thing, is that even at supply 1, right? Even if they're only counting a supply 1, like, you still have to wear them down a lot in order to get rid of that supply. So that is a 1 supply you can count on that might last a good bit longer than, say, your average Zerglings or even your average hydralisks, okay? So, worth keeping in mind. Collateral Reconstitution can be really nice. Again, it can give you a really nice move. It is often enough to get in range to shoot people. I tend to find I'm a bigger fan of Burrow Ambush, because you tend to be able to still get up really aggressively, get into a place where you want to be able to really affect the battlefield, and they kind of force the enemy to come to you. And by doing that, you're then able to kind of really aggressively deal with the enemy in ways that they may not have originally expected. And again, you don't have to worry about spending a resource every single turn potentially for multiple turns for redeploy, which is really good. One of the often overlooked things when you're examining units is that this is a 50mm base, which is really big. It's not like too massive. It doesn't make it impossible to get around them or maneuver around them. But it means that if you're trying to take up an objective, you can take up a lot of the space for scoring around the objective, especially if they don't want to get within 1 inch of you, right? If it's an adept unit, adepts are pretty good at shooting, especially against light targets. They can actually be pretty reasonable in close combat. But even if they take their Glaive Strike upgrade, that does nothing to help them against roaches because you are not a light unit. So now, like, they can get in close if they really want to, And with their shade ability, they're a really good unit for just throwing to the far ends of the battlefield to contest a far-flung objective. But if the Roach is there first and they're already in range and now the Adepts are trying to get in, they can shoot at the Roaches as long as they want. They're not going to do a lot of damage, even with Resonating Glaives, which costs them an energy every single turn to use. And then compare that to the Roach. The Roach is surging back at them. They've got a good number of attacks against them. The Adept is way less survivable, like by a long shot, compared to the Roach. And it really doesn't take very many wounds to start dropping those Adepts, right? You got to do 8 wounds to the Roach. You got to do 8 wounds to the Adepts for them both to drop to supply 0. I contend it is a lot easier to drop Adepts with a 5+ armor, very limited access to a 5+ evade, especially if you flung them forward and you don't have a sentry nearby, which is most Adepts, right? Most Adepts just assume they don't have a sentry to help them out. Compare that to a Roach, which is getting double the armor save and potentially an evade save with something as simple as hatchery. Voila, right? We've got it, right? So like I'm just saying this supply 1 is extremely hard to remove, especially by comparison to other units that are likely to be challengers against it when they're trying to stake an objective, okay? And so just in general, in my mind, from a utility standpoint, the fact that you can use this to easily contest objectives, it's going to hold on to that objective for quite a while. It's very easily maneuverable to other parts of the battlefield. This is a really, really good choice. And when looking at objective holding, unsurprisingly, it's very good at it, right? It's an armored target, so now there's a whole lot of surge, especially the fast-moving surge, that doesn't work against it, which is really nice. You might still have to worry about Zerglings, but more on that maybe in a future battle report, because in my experience, Roaches actually do a pretty okay job of dealing with Zerglings, especially if they start burrowed. And then with a 3+ armor value, obviously, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. 5+ evade that they can regularly get, and the fact they can regenerate, like, it was going to be at least average, even if that's all it got, right? It was going to be average just for that, right? And then with a supply of 1, like, it can hold objectives, and it can actually hold objectives pretty well against small contesting teams, right? Against units like Adepts, small Zergling squads, small Marine squads. I personally prefer the odds of the Roach to any of those. I would even prefer it to the supply 2 small size hydralisk squads. If somebody sends a small hydralisk unit against against these Roaches, and I've got Roaches in defense, especially if I've got them burrowed so they had to move within 4 inches of me to shoot, or heck, even if they had to use an observer to try to, an overseer in order to try to reveal me, even in that situation, even if I'm not shooting first, I kind of like my odds. I like my odds. As long as they're within 8 inches of me, I think we're going to do just fine trying to push against them, because Roaches are going to eat through hydralisks very, very quickly and start removing models very, very quickly. And as soon as the number of attacks starts to drop, heaven forbid you should be shooting a Vile Roach. And again, more on this in the Vile Roach video, where they can simply make it so that hopefully Hydras are not hitting nearly as well as they were before. So heck, even if they do get precision 1 from a Hydralisk den, who cares? They missed with a good number of them, right? Like, your chances of survival are actually quite good with the Roach, even though you paid less points. They're really, really good. And when looking at their attack range, 8 inches is a pretty short range, so I'm going to give them only 1 point for it. But it's better than being melee only, right? Because now you can winnow people down as they're approaching the objective before they even get in range, which is really, really nice. And with your damage output being really good against light units, you know, it's not an all-around, so I'm not going to give it quite as many points as I might give to, say, the Zerglings that we gave points to. It's still pretty darn good, right? You can do solid removal of any sort of light units that are out there, and you can chip away potentially at armored targets depending on how well they're doing. And so from holding from a holding perspective, sure, like, you might want to give them some help. I found that combining Roaches with Zerglings is actually really good, because you throw the Roaches down, the enemy starts throwing units to try to push, then you move up a bunch of Zerglings nearby, and now you can then shoot with the Roaches if you want to. Or you can just throw the Zerglings in, let them try to maul. The enemy tries to take time, and the Roaches are just sitting there being like, well, if anybody wants to try to come over here to this objective, feel free. But one, we're perfectly content to just keep it ours for now. That's totally fine. We're very safe here. And whatever remains from the Zergling push that we did, just our little throwaway 200 to 210 point Zergling squad, whatever survives now has to deal with us, right? And whatever the Zerglings did, you probably do have less attacks. So Give them some help, maybe. Can be really useful. But just in general, on their own, they do tend to do pretty okay. When looking at objective taking potential, ironically, they're also still really good. And the reason for this is, first of all, they are reasonably fast, especially when you factor in things like a burrow ambush that effectively gives them a 50 millimeters plus an extra 18 inches move on the first turn toward where the enemy is. That is extremely fast. Extremely fast. Okay. You probably have to be using some sort of proxy in order to get that kind of level of movement. With supply one, they are technically capable of challenging objectives, and they're going to hold on to that supply one for quite a long time. With an 8-inch range, they have a short range, but that's not necessarily bad because, again, you got to get in close in order to stake the objective anyway. And their damage output being pretty reasonable against light targets. I'm not going to give them quite as many points because a lot of people do tend to try to use armored targets to try to hold objectives, but they are pretty good at clearing out those kinds of units. And sometimes that's what the enemy has to try to hold things, right? And then this is the big thing with their resilience being what it is. The fact that you can throw these toward an objective and they can go multiple rounds, even under heavy fire, for a while is really, really good, even while still maintaining that supply of one. That is phenomenally good for trying to take an objective because it means not only can you, with relative ease, push a light unit off, against an armored target, especially if they're only relying on a 4+ armor with no evade save, things like Goliaths, Queens, in a lot of cases, actually, Stalkers, right? If they're not getting that 3+ armor save like, say, Marauders can, a really good round of shooting from a Roach unit can actually be quite dangerous to those armored targets and could slip them to the point where suddenly they're not nearly as effective on the objective and might even lose the objective. In the case of a small Marauder squad, they might drop to supply 0 while you're still at 1. And because of the fact that you're getting evades and they're not, like, they might just start losing the objective even while they're still on it, right? So just in general, they can be a really effective way of pushing, especially, of course, if you escort them with something that can help to handle armored units. But even just on their own, they tend to do okay. And so when we look at the opportunity cost, they're actually really good. They're one of the best units that we've reviewed, and I think a lot of the reason for that is that, one, they're not eating up a lot of your resources, which means you're free to use tactical cards to make them even better. They're not the greatest on offense, sure, but the fact that they're super tanky with the ability to get on objectives and hold onto those objectives for a while means these can be extremely difficult to deal with, especially in large numbers, right? Heaven forbid you should get 2 road squads onto a single objective, because now trying to get rid of all of that supply is going to be extremely difficult, and they might chew through whatever you send at them, right? And the beauty about this, we didn't even consider this in the assessment, is that starting at 170 points is super cheap, right? In my mind, they're not 170 points, they're 180 points, because you should always take Hydraulic Ballast just for 10 points, getting a D3+1 Surge against one of the most common unit types that is likely to be around, which is light targets, in basically every army composition. Even as we go forward into the future, we're not likely to see people only running armored units. Like, unless they're doing Roach Rushes, they're probably not just going to do all armor, right? They're going to have Adepts or Zealots or Sentries in there somewhere. They're going to have Marines or Medics in there somewhere. When we eventually get Reapers, we could see Reapers being a really solid build, and they're probably going to do Hydralisks or Zergs or Zerglings in some way, shape, or form, right? Eventually, when we end up getting things like, I believe that the Defiler is also light. I'm pretty sure the Infestor is also light. Anybody's running support stuff, unless it's a Queen, it's probably going to be light. And so the result is, heaven forbid, when Archons start dropping, they don't get a term, but the Templar that spawn Archons do count as light. So, like, I think we're going to be seeing light targets for a while. Okay, we're not about to see them disappear. So it's probably worth 10 points just to make them better. Again, if it means the difference between kicking an Archon before an Archon can throw something dangerous down, it's probably worth it, right? If you can remove some Templar, that's a good value, right? I don't even know what the cost is going to be on Templar, but I can promise you this, it's going to be good value, okay? And so, generally speaking, always take that 10-point upgrade. I generally also tend to take Burrow Ambush most of the time. But the primary reason for taking that is it means I don't need to take Lowry Constitution. I can probably get away with taking the 1. They're probably where I want them for basically the entire battle. So now I don't need to be worried about spending biomass and I don't need to be worried about paying an extra 20 points for Glower Constitution. Now, you can take Tunneling Claws if you want to. One of the biggest benefits behind Tunneling Claws is that it makes it really difficult to zone you out, right? If you've moved up close to an objective and then they tried to keep you out of that range by putting a little line of Zealots or a line of Marines, and you don't want to spend multiple turns trying to maneuver around it, you can just burrow, Tunneling Claws, get underneath of them, slip to the other side. Now you're also within range and you're within your shooting range, and now they got to handle you, right? They still got to try to shoot at you or try to charge you or something, but you've removed their impact hits or you're giving yourself an evade save against ranged attacks. All of that's positives, right? So you can take it if you want to. I don't think it's strictly necessary, certainly not on all roaches, but it can be a really, really nice thing, right? So just things to think about, right? In terms of how you build them out. There's no wrong way to build a roach, even if you technically just take the stock standard roach, because you have 170 left. You don't even have points for hydrotic bile. It'll technically do just fine, right? I tend to find surges a really nice thing to invest in, but they'll do okay. And I think that comes from the fact that the real beauty behind the roach is the fact that it doesn't have hard-baked, expensive energy cost stuff in it, right? It's not costing you a lot of resources innately. It has a reasonable volume at 3 shots per model, right? A lot of models will get 3 or less, right? So it's on par with some of the best of what everybody's running. And it's just super tanky, especially in a list that doesn't get a lot of tanky stuff. At least not yet, right? Not until we get the Ultralisk. And so if you find that you've been struggling with Zerg, just like, if this week has told you nothing, maybe it's just give a try to Roaches. And when we end up reviewing the Corpser Roach and the Vile Roach in the future, just know you might want to consider those depending on your playstyle because they can be really useful. I've gotten a lot of good use out of the Vile Roach. Corpser's fine. I think they can be really useful. It's not necessarily my favorite, but it's still up there for one of my favorite Zerg pieces, but mostly just because it starts on the Roach chassis, which is always going to be a good start. What do you think? Do you think that the Roach is wasted because you face too many armored units and they just don't do enough damage? Are you sold that this is absolutely everything you're going to be playing for Zerg? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.